Ethan always thought the worst kind of silence was the one that existed between two people who used to love each other loudly. For months now, that silence had taken over his apartment like an unwanted guest, sitting on the couch between him and Mark, following him from room to room, filling every moment with a heaviness Ethan didn't know how to carry anymore. Mark barely looked at him these days. Dinner together had become a rare occasion. Even when they were in the same room, Mark's attention was always locked on his glowing phone screen, smiling at messages Ethan never saw, laughing at jokes he was never a part of. And Ethan, he had learned to stop asking. Each time he tried to start conversation, he was met with a distracted later that never turned into anything more. He didn't know when they had stopped talking, stopped touching, stopped feeling like a couple. He only knew that somewhere along the way, he had become invisible in his own home. That was why he ended up attending the LGBTQ plus community meetup alone, an event Mark had promised they'd go to together. Ethan had chosen both their outfits the night before. Mark forgot he agreed to go at all. So Ethan went alone, not because he wanted to, but because staying home waiting for Mark to remember felt even worse. The meeting room was warm, filled with chatter and easy laughter, but Ethan felt strangely out of place, like everyone else belonged to a world still alive with color, while he was stuck in grayscale. He found an empty chair in the back, telling himself he'd leave early. He didn't expect anyone to sit beside him, especially because every other seat was filled long before his. But then someone rushed in late, coat half-zipped, hair wind-blown, apologizing softly to the room before scanning for a seat. The only empty spot was next to Ethan. He slid into the chair with a relieved sigh and flashed Ethan a quick smile. "I swear I'm usually not late. Today just wasn't easy." Ethan returned a polite smile. "You and me both." The man chuckled under his breath, brushing raindrops from his sleeves. "Daniel." He held out his hand. "Ethan." The handshake was brief, warm, and unexpectedly grounding. The meeting went on around them, people sharing stories, joking, supporting each other. But Ethan found himself focusing more on Daniel's quiet reactions, the soft nods, the moments his expression fell at certain stories, the way his eyes seemed tired, not from the day, but from something deeper. At one point, Ethan joked lightly, "I think I'm the only one here whose partner forgot this event even existed." Daniel let out a small laugh, but it didn't reach his eyes. Mine didn't forget. He just didn't think it mattered enough to come. There it was, the same kind of loneliness Ethan carried, reflected back at him through someone else's voice. "Yeah," Ethan murmured, "I get that." Their exchange was simple, barely more than a few sentences, but something about it wrapped around Ethan's chest with a quiet ache. It wasn't flirting. It wasn't romantic. It was recognition. Two people who had stopped being seen by the ones who promised to love them. When the meeting ended, rain had begun pouring outside. Ethan paused at the doorway, staring at the sky, already regretting not bringing an umbrella. Before he could step out, Daniel appeared beside him, holding one above both their heads. "Come on," he said gently. "You'll get soaked." Ethan hesitated. "You sure? You don't have to." "It's fine," Daniel said with a small smile. "Besides, walking alone in the rain sounds like a metaphor for something I don't want to deal with today." Ethan laughed quietly. Fair enough. As they walked together down the glowing wet sidewalk, their conversation unfolded naturally. Nothing heavy, just two strangers sharing small pieces of themselves. Favorite music, work stress, childhood memories that shaped who they became. At one point, Ethan mentioned how Mark used to surprise him with little notes and spontaneous dates, things that had disappeared over the years. Daniel listened closely, really listened, before speaking. "Ryan used to leave flowers on my desk. Now I'm lucky if we eat in the same room once a week." He paused, a hint of vulnerability slipping through. "It's like we stopped being partners and started being roommates with history." Ethan nodded slowly. "I think I know exactly what you mean." They reached the street where their paths separated. Ethan stopped first, turned to thank him for the umbrella and the walk. Daniel hesitated before speaking, voice quieter than before. "I don't say this to just anyone, but I'm lonely." He looked down for a moment, then back at Ethan. "And it's strange, But talking to you tonight, it felt like someone finally noticed. Ethan's breath caught. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't a confession. It was honesty, raw and unpolished. The kind people hide for too long until it cracks them open. I noticed, Ethan whispered, unsure why the words felt heavier than they should. Maybe because I feel the same. Daniel's eyes softened. For a moment, Ethan felt a pull, gentle, human, comforting. But Daniel stepped back first, offering the umbrella, even though he was the one who brought it. "Keep it," Daniel said. "Maybe it'll bring you better luck than it did me." Ethan tried to protest, but Daniel only smiled, hands already in his pockets as he stepped into the rain. "Good night, Ethan." "Good night, Daniel." Ethan stood there for a long time, watching him disappear down the shimmering street. He didn't know why a stranger's presence lingered so strongly in his mind. All he knew was that when he finally climbed into bed later, staring at the empty space beside him where Mark should have been, it wasn't Mark's face replaying in his thoughts. It was Daniel's soft smile, and the way he said he felt lonely too. Ethan woke the next morning with a strange heaviness in his chest, something between guilt and warmth. He told himself it was just the rain, or the quiet of the apartment, or the way Mark had already left without saying goodbye again. But as he stood in the kitchen pouring coffee, the umbrella Daniel had given him leaned against the door, a soft reminder of the unexpected connection he wasn't sure he was allowed to feel. He didn't plan to text Daniel. He really didn't. But sometime after lunch, after Mark didn't reply to his message, and after the apartment felt unbearably silent, Ethan found himself typing. "Thanks again for last night. I got home dry." Then he stared at the screen for nearly a minute, debating whether to hit send. He did. He set the phone aside, telling himself not to expect an answer. But Daniel replied within 2 minutes. "I'm glad. I got home drenched anyway." A beat later. "Worth it, though." Ethan felt something flicker inside him, small, quick, but real. Their conversation started light. Work frustrations, the rainstorm, the meet-up group. But soon it slipped into more personal territory. The kind people only reveal when something them trusts the stranger they're speaking to. Daniel admitted he'd slept on the couch last night because Ryan came home late and went straight to bed without a word. Ethan told him that Mark had brushed past him in the hallway that morning, too distracted by his phone to notice Ethan's hopeful smile. There was no flirting, no intentions, just two people acknowledging that their lives had cracks they'd been too afraid to look at closely. Over the next few days, their conversations didn't stop. If anything, they grew longer, deeper. Ethan found himself waiting for Daniel's good morning text more than he waited for anything from Mark. And Daniel, he sent voice notes sometimes, short ones, where Ethan could hear the tiredness in his voice or the little laugh he tried to hide. Ethan listened to those messages more than once, not because he should, but because something in Daniel's voice made him feel seen. One night, when Mark came home late again, Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, trying to start a conversation. "Can we talk?" he asked gently. Mark didn't even look up from his phone. "Not tonight, Ethan. I'm exhausted." Ethan swallowed his disappointment quietly. "Okay, maybe tomorrow." But he knew tomorrow would be the same. Later that night, unable to sleep, he texted Daniel, "Are you awake?" Daniel responded almost instantly, "Yeah, couldn't sleep either." They talked about everything they couldn't say to anyone else. Ethan confessed how lonely he felt, how small he'd become trying to keep his relationship alive. Daniel talked about the way Ryan didn't look at him the way he used to, how he felt like a shadow in his own home. At one point, Daniel wrote, "Do you ever feel like you're the only one fighting for something that already died?" Ethan stared at those words for a long moment before replying, "Every day." The next afternoon, it rained again, hard and sudden. Ethan walked into a small cafe near his work, shaking off water from his jacket. As he turned toward an empty table, he froze. Daniel was there, sitting by the window, tapping distractedly on a laptop. They both blinked in surprise. Then Daniel smiled, an honest, bright, startled smile that made Ethan's heart skip. "Ethan? Wow, I didn't expect." "I didn't either," Ethan said, unable to stop the warmth rising inside him. Daniel closed his laptop immediately. "Sit with me?" Ethan nodded, feeling strangely nervous as he slid into the seat across from him. Rain streaked down the window beside them, filling the cafe with a soft hum, making the moment feel more intimate than it should have been. They talked for nearly an hour. Daniel told him he used to love rainy days because Ryan would make tea and they'd watch movies together, but that hadn't happened in years. Ethan shared how Mark used to leave silly notes in his lunch bag, things Ethan pretended not to care about but secretly treasured. Their coffees grew cold as they talked, and at one point, when Ethan wiped a raindrop from his cheek, Daniel moved instinctively, hand reaching forward, thumb brushing the last drop away. The touch lasted barely half a second, but Ethan felt it everywhere. Daniel froze immediately afterward, pulling his hand back like he'd touched fire. God, Ethan, I didn't mean, I shouldn't have done that. Ethan's heart was pounding, not from the touch, but from the way Daniel's voice trembled, like he cared too much about crossing a line. They both knew was delicate. It's okay, Ethan whispered. Really? Daniel looked away, eyes on the rain. I don't want to hurt anyone. Not Ryan and not you. Ethan nodded. I don't want that either. But the truth, the unspoken truth, sat between them like a quiet breath neither wanted to exhale. They left the cafe together, walking side by side through the rain, not touching, not saying anything they shouldn't. But the air around them was different now. Warmer, sharper, charged with a kind of understanding that was impossible to ignore. When they reached the corner where they'd part ways, Ethan hesitated. Daniel, do you ever wonder why we met? I mean, of all days, of all moments. Daniel's eyes softened. I've been wondering that every day. Ethan felt the words settle into him like a truth he'd been tiptoeing around. This feels dangerous, he said quietly. Daniel nodded. Yeah, but it also feels real. They didn't hug. They didn't touch. They didn't cross the line. But when Ethan walked away, he knew the line had already blurred the moment he realized he was no longer thinking about Mark's absence. He was thinking about Daniel's presence. Ethan woke the next morning with an unfamiliar stillness inside him, the kind that comes only after a night spent thinking instead of sleeping. His mind drifted again and again to the same truth. What he felt around Daniel wasn't supposed to happen, but pretending it wasn't there had become impossible. Mark's side of the bed was untouched, the sheets cold, as if he hadn't slept there in days. Maybe he hadn't. Ethan wasn't sure anymore when they'd last fallen asleep beside each other, instead of drifting further apart. When Mark finally walked in around noon, the apartment door closing softly behind him, Ethan decided he couldn't keep swallowing his feelings. Mark, he said, steadying his voice, we need to talk. Mark dropped his keys on the counter and sighed, like Ethan had asked him for something unreasonable. Ethan, can it wait? I'm exhausted. I've had the worst night. It always has to wait, Ethan replied gently. That's the problem. Mark rubbed his eyes, annoyed. So what? You want to start a fight now? I don't want to fight, Ethan insisted. I just want to understand why we stopped trying. Why you stopped being here. Mark waved a hand dismissively. You're overthinking. Things just get harder sometimes. That doesn't mean everything's wrong. But you don't talk to me, Ethan whispered. You don't look at me. You come home late. You don't answer texts. Mark, I feel like I'm living with a stranger. Mark stared at him, expression unreadable, before giving a tired shrug. Maybe that's just how relationships get. Not everything stays exciting forever. That was it. That sentence. That shrug. It told Ethan everything he needed to know. He realized Mark wasn't cold or cruel. He was simply done. And neither of them had been brave enough to say it. Ethan's voice cracked slightly. Do you still love me? Mark hesitated. And in that hesitation, Ethan found his answer. He didn't need to hear the words aloud. He took a slow breath. I think we need to let this go, Mark, before we hurt each other more. Mark looked at him for a long moment, then nodded faintly. No anger, no sadness, just acceptance. And that hurt more than yelling ever could. I'll pack some things later, Mark said quietly. Ethan nodded, feeling the final chapter of their story closing with a softness he wasn't prepared for. Across the city, Daniel was facing his own storm. He stood in the kitchen, hands curled around a mug of untouched tea, while Ryan typed rapidly on his laptop, barely glancing at him. Daniel swallowed hard, gathering courage. "Ryan, can we talk?" he asked, voice trembling slightly. "Can it wait?" Ryan replied, not looking up, "I'm slammed with work." Daniel let out a soft, humorless laugh. "You're always slammed with work." Ryan finally paused, looking up with confusion. "What's going on?" Daniel's throat tightened. "I don't know who we are anymore. I feel like I'm alone even when you're right here." Ryan blinked, unsure how to respond. "I've been trying," Daniel continued, voice shaky. "Trying to tell you I feel invisible. Trying to hold on to us. But I can't be the only one fighting for a marriage you barely notice." Ryan's jaw clenched. "Daniel, don't do this. I love you. I've been busy. Things will get easier soon. You've been saying that for years." Silence fell, heavy and raw. Daniel gently set the mug down. "I think we need space. Not because I don't love you, but because I've forgotten what it feels like to be loved back." Ryan's eyes softened, but he didn't argue. He didn't reach for Daniel. He didn't fight. And that was answer enough. Later that evening, Ethan went for a walk to clear his head. The park was quiet, the sky a soft, fading blue. He sat on a bench beneath a bear tree, letting the wind settle over him like a blanket. He didn't expect to see Daniel walking toward him. Daniel looked just as surprised, stopping short before giving a small, tired smile. "Ethan, hey." "Hi," Ethan whispered. "Rough day." Daniel let out a breath. "You have no idea." "Sit," Ethan said softly. Daniel did. Not close, not far. Just somewhere in the middle, a space that had become familiar, without either of them trying to find it. After a moment, Daniel spoke first. "Ryan and I, we're taking some time apart." "I'm sorry," Ethan said gently. Daniel shook his head. "No, I think it was overdue." Ethan nodded. "Mark and I ended things this morning." Daniel looked at him with empathy. So deep it almost broke something open inside Ethan. "I'm sorry, Ethan. Truly." Ethan breathed out carefully. Maybe things fall apart so we can stop pretending they're whole." Daniel stared at the ground, voice barely audible. "Does it make me a bad person that I'm relieved? That I'm not completely falling apart?" "No," Ethan said softly. "It makes you honest." Another quiet moment stretched between them, warm this time, not uncomfortable. Daniel turned toward him slowly. "Ethan, I don't know what this is between us. I don't know what it means. I just know that when I talk to you, I feel like I can finally breathe again." Ethan felt his heartbeat skip. "I feel the same. You make things feel less heavy." Daniel swallowed hard. "I told myself I wouldn't fall for anyone again. Not after everything." Ethan's voice was gentle. "I'm not asking you to fall. I'm just asking you to be here." Daniel's eyes glistened, not with tears, but with something softer, something hopeful. Slowly, cautiously, Daniel reached out, letting his hand rest on the bench between them. Ethan looked at it, then placed his own hand beside Daniel's. Not touching, just close enough that the space between them felt like a promise. After a long moment, Daniel's fingers brushed Ethan's. Light, careful, meaningful. Ethan's breath hitched, but he didn't pull away. He turned his hand, letting Daniel settle into his palm. It was the simplest gesture in the world, but it felt like everything. No rush, no impulsiveness. Just two men who had lost themselves finally finding a moment of peace. "We don't have to define anything right now," Ethan said softly. "We can take it slow. Heal first. Figure out the rest as we go." Daniel nodded, voice barely a whisper. "I'd like that." The wind rustled the branches above them, scattering a few leaves at their feet. The world felt quiet again, but this time it wasn't the painful silence they were used to. It was a beginning, a gentle one, an honest one. Ethan looked at Daniel, and Daniel looked back at him, both recognizing the same truth. What they found in each other wasn't born out of betrayal. It was born out of finally being seen. And as they sat there, hands gently intertwined, Ethan realized at the moment Daniel told him, "I'm gay too," he had no idea that the real confession, the real change, would come later. Not in words, but in the way they chose to start again, together, slowly, carefully, beautifully,